The first half, I'll get started with the first half of my second session. It's on problem solving. Basically, as educators, we face a lot of problems at our educational institute. As students, they face a lot of problems. So students as well as educators keep facing problems. So the basic idea here is to suggest solutions to some very commonly occurring problems in academia. So with that introduction, let's get started. Uh, all right. So the takeaways from today's session. We'll basically try to identify some of the most commonly occurring problems faced in academia by teachers and students. And we'll try to discuss various solutions. We'll try to explore various possibilities and then come up with some meaningful solutions. Excuse me. And then sometimes you have to adopt some very alternative approaches. They are not like conventional, but sometimes you need to adopt those in order to achieve proper resolution, in order to get a solution for your problem. So we'll go over all of those. And the final aim of this session is actually to implement what we learn and feel positive about yourselves. Because see, the thing is, regardless of where you're working, you could be working in academia, you could be working in industry, you could be working in the government sector. At the end of the day, all of us need to feel positive about our existence. We exist for a reason, and if our existence is miserable, if somebody is making our existence miserable, if people are creating problems, or if problems are not having any solutions, then our life becomes miserable. So the idea here is to make your life nice, positive and peaceful by trying by exploring certain avenues, by exploring solutions, by seeing what the problems are, the real world problems in academia, and trying to suggest solutions or fixes. So let's see how we can successfully overcome, or at least try to overcome, some of the common problems faced by today's instructors and learners. All right. So why do we need to do this exercise? See, what happens is, if you keep things unresolved for a long time, then it basically takes a toll on your physical as well as mental health. And if you look at Google Trends, I'm not sure if it was 2019 or 20, but during one of those years, the most common search term, the most commonly Googled phrase was mental health. You'll be surprised. And it was not just related to academia. People across the globe who use Google to search various things, they searched for this phrase. What was the phrase? Mental health. Why? Because today a lot of people, not just in academia but across various industries, are facing this problem. Now, this problem has been further compounded because of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. But regardless of that, I mean, coronavirus or no coronavirus, problems have always been existing in academia or industry or anywhere. It is our job to identify the problems, and it is also our job to identify meaningful solutions to the identified problems. Now, sometimes the solutions are very straightforward, like a plus b gives c, 1 plus 2 equals 3. It's a very easy solution. But sometimes the problems are a little bit intricate, and I'm not saying that they don't have any solutions, but what I'm essentially saying is that you need to think a little bit harder in order to arrive at meaningful solutions or practical solutions. Now, you can always seek help from experts these days. There are all these counselors and psychologists and ombudsman, and we'll see all of these things in details as we proceed. But yes, you're not alone in your journey. You can always seek help from professionals. These people are trained to communicate with people, to understand their issues, and to resolve any pending issues. So you can always get guidance from experts, professionals, because that is their full-time job. They do it for a living, so they know exactly how to handle tricky situations. Many of us may or may not be able to handle tricky situations, but experts are always able to do that because they are trained for that. They are professionally trained for these things. And now finally, before actually looking at some of the most common problems faced by teachers and students, one thing I want to really emphasize upon is that effective communication really helps in resolving many issues. So if there is an generally misunderstandings and all these issues and problems occur because of miscommunication or inadequate communication. So if you communicate well, the odds of finding a reasonable solution or a practical solution increase significantly. So good communication is really the key here. All right. So now, what are the common problems? Before diving into this topic, let's see why problems occur in the first place. Problems generally occur because usually there is a gap. So there is a gap. So let's say person A has certain requirements and those requirements are not being met. Then there is a gap between what the person wants and what he or she is being offered. So when there is a gap, there's a problem, because what you expect is not what you get, and that's the source of most of the problems. So in order to minimize or reduce problems, we cannot eliminate problems 100%, but we can shield ourselves from them. We can also try to find meaningful resolutions. So what's the best approach? The best approach is to address the gap first. So just like in the previous session we saw, how do you innovate? The very first thing you do is you identify the burning problem, whatever is the burning question or the burning problem, and then try to find an intelligent solution. That's how you innovate. Similarly, how do you solve problems? What is the best approach when it comes to problem solving? Well, you identify the gap, just see where the gap exists, and then try to address that gap, try to fill in that gap, so that all the problems that you might be facing will eventually have reasonable solutions, meaningful solutions, practical solutions. um, Now, are these issues only restricted to educators? No. Just like teachers, students also have their own set of problems. So we'll see some of the problems that are unique to teachers. We'll see some of the problems that are unique to today's students. And we'll also cover some overlap areas. Like, for example, the pandemic is affecting all of us. It's affecting the students as well as the teachers. Just an example. So we'll see all kinds of problem areas, and then we'll try to come up with some decent solutions. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. So see, life is full of positivity. Many people, many people get up during the day and then they go to office, they go and teach, or they go to some pharmaceutical company or some engineering firm. They work, they come home, they get tired, they eat, they sleep. Now, all of us follow a particular routine. We always follow a defined set of activities during the weekdays, and weekends, of course, it's flexible. It's a holiday time, so we can spend our weekends in a different way. But during the weekdays, usually most of us have a set routine. And what happens is, when we have a fixed routine, things get redundant. So what we must try to do first is we must try to break the routine. You try to do something very interesting every day at work. You don't need to do the same exact boring thing. You can always bring in innovation, and that's where innovation comes into picture. People who innovate, by nature, they are always happy. I have yet to see a person, I have yet to see an innovator who is depressed. That I have never seen so far. I have never seen a depressed innovator so far. People who conduct research, meaningful research, not some research, like meaningful research, people who really innovate and make a difference to other people's lives, they are always happy people. Because what is the aim of their life? The aim of their life is not to impress other people. The aim of their life is to achieve their targets and goals and missions, and to achieve a particular target and get satisfied from that achievement. They are not here to please people and get happiness. They don't derive their happiness from people. See, people who derive happiness from other people are bound to feel unhappy at some point, because there's no such thing as a perfect person. But if a certain mission is your target, then you can always be happy, because you can keep on improving yourself, get satisfied. Oh, I did something better yesterday. My today's version of me is better than yesterday's version of me. So I'm growing every day, I'm getting better and better. So every day you feel happy. That's how you solve most of your problems. Now, when I go and discuss things with my friends, I always make it a point to discuss ideas. I don't like to discuss people. Why? Because that's not my policy. I like being creative. I like being innovative, and I also like to hang out with people who have a similar mindset, because that's what gives me energy and positivity. So that's what I'm trying to stress here, that life is full of positivity. There's always a solution. We just need to find it. We just need to hunt for it. Uh, Issues should not be kept pending, because if something is kept pending, it can adversely affect your physical and mental health. That's why timely intervention is absolutely necessary. When you see something, say something. I was standing on this Chicago on a Chicago subway station, and I heard an announcement that if you see some suspicious object, please report it to 911 or to blah blah blah. So what they meant to say is, and at the end of the announcement, there was a sentence which I remembered. It just I keep remembering that sentence all the time. When you see something, say something. What it means is, when you see that something is not going right, you have to speak about it. If you keep it inside, then it will affect your health adversely. You'll get blood pressure, you'll get type 2 diabetes, you'll get heart attacks, you'll get cancer. If you want to stay healthy, you have to speak about your problems with someone. It could be your spouse, it could be your friend, it could be your parents, it could be your colleagues, it could be your coworker, it could be your neighbor, it could be a trusted person, it could be a psychiatrist, it could be a counselor, anybody. But you have to speak about your problems with someone. You have to vent it out, because see, as humans, we have been gifted with a fantastic skill. What is that skill? It's called communication. And when I say communication, I don't mean to say speaking. I also mean to say listening. Because if you remember, I had seen this somewhere. I'm sure most of you must have also seen it. We have 2 ears and one mouth. Why? Because nature wants us to listen more and speak less. Now, of course, if I'm giving a webinar, of course I have to speak more. But barring that one exception, generally we should also listen to other people. And that's why at the end of every session, I make it a point to also address queries from the audience, because I cannot just keep talking. I also need to understand your queries and doubts, and then it's like a two-way process. So having said that, so now let's move on to the next slide. So we are here to find solutions to some of these problems. I think there was a typo there. Sorry about that. So we'll be covering teachers' problems, and we'll also be covering students' problems. Let's identify them, and let's try to find some meaningful solutions to both of these problems. All right, moving on to the next slide. Culture gap. Now, when I first went to the US in 2002, we had something called as orientation at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And what they do during the orientation program is they basically try to acclimatize the newcomers with the American culture. Because when people visit the United States from various countries, initially they are kind of shocked, because the culture there is very different. So in order to minimize the shock, they basically try to orient the students. So what they tell them is, American students. So I was working as a teaching assistant. I went there to pursue my PhD. They gave me a $18,000 per year teaching assistantship. I never paid a dime from my pocket. My entire PhD was fully funded. I was actually earning money during my PhD and sending money home back to India. And I did not borrow money from my parents. I entirely funded my PhD by myself. I was paying taxes. I was in fact earning money. I bought my laptop and did so many things. So the reason why I'm telling this is it was a great experience. The American experience was really great. Now, culture, every country has its own culture. There is no such thing as right or wrong. Whatever you feel as wrong may be right for them. Whatever they feel as right may be wrong for you. So although these things keep happening, but what we have to do essentially, what they told us during orientation is, you have to focus on your target. What is your target? You are here to study biochemistry. So let that be your target. If there are any issues, we are here to help you. So if you narrow down things to your focus area, then there is really no reason to get disturbed by things happening around you. Like regardless of what the American culture is all about, you can still continue pursuing your PhD in biochemistry at the University of Illinois at Chicago. That's essentially what they said. And I followed their advice, and I successfully finished my PhD. I did my postdoc, everything was fine. I still maintain Indian culture. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't, of course, do drugs. That's out of question. And I still have all the proper Indian qualities in me. I stayed there for more than a decade, but I have not become Americanized at all because I retained my culture. I know where my roots are. I retained them, and I listened to their advice. The advice that they had given to us, shared with us during the orientation program, that there will always be a culture gap. The only way to address it is to realize that there will be a gap and keep on doing your things. So similarly, if there is a gap between the students, your students' culture and your culture, just realize that it's always going to be there. Our job is to focus on our work area, and that's what matters. All right, the next one. Many educators complain about this a lot, like they are assigned a lot of tasks and there's very less time to do anything. Like they have to take attendance and finish paperwork and then grade the examinations and then do all sorts of things, and to some extent it is true. So I'm not saying it's fully true or fully false, but what I'm essentially saying is it's true to some extent, and we have to strike the right balance. So what we have to do is now, if you're, let's say, if you're working at a private institute, you can always approach management and schedule meetings. Effective communication is really the key here. If you really have some concerns, some very legitimate concerns, you can always make a list of those concerns and present it to management. Tell them that these are the problems we are facing, and if you could relieve if you could reduce some of these tasks, we would be able to focus more on our teaching and research. And is this something that you can do for us, you could do for us? Now sometimes this strategy works, effective communication works, but look at the last point. Hint: diplomacy works at times, and nobody is going to tell this to you. That's why I am telling this to you. So what is diplomacy? Diplomacy, what you have to do is, first of all, you try to communicate your grievances to the management and try to see if they can optimize your workload such that you'll be able to assign your time for the most meaningful activities. Now, what are the most meaningful activities when you are in academia? Number one, if you are at a research university, the number one activity is research and then teaching. If you are at a teaching university, it's mainly teaching and a little bit research. So depending on where you are located, you could prioritize those activities. Although I would still say that research should always get priority regardless of where you are located, because with good research comes good teaching, and those go hand in hand. So what do I mean by diplomacy? Diplomacy is what you can tell management is, see, a lot of students they are kind of, first of all, I have a lot of students in my class because we have had some fantastic admissions last year, and I'm not able to dedicate enough time for my daily preparation. I need to prepare for my lecture every day, and I source my material from some research papers as well. So I have to keep reading, and be realistic. You just don't say it for the sake of it. You have to be realistic and truthful. Being truthful is very important. By diplomatic, I'm not saying that you have to fake something. What I'm essentially saying is tell the story to them from a different perspective. Tell it to them from their perspective. Tell them that if you want the quality of our graduating students to be outstanding, then you must make sure that you give us enough time to educate these students. Because if we spend our time in maintaining attendance sheets and doing all kinds of administrative work, then we'll not have enough time to dedicate for research and teaching activities. So if you want the output of our institute to be of high quality, then please, could you reduce some of these tasks and let us focus on teaching and research? If you say that, and that's what I mean by diplomacy. Tell them something that matters to them. The quality of the output matters to them, right? Because if they have high quality output, more people will get admitted to their institute. So if you tell it from this angle, they'll probably listen to you more eagerly. This is what I mean by diplomacy. We are not faking anything. We are not resorting to illegal measures. We are not doing anything wrong. We are just changing the perspective and telling them what is the real picture, giving them an idea about the picture, the true picture, and making an attempt to find a solution. All right. So that's one way to do it. Now, sometimes educators say that they're always under pressure to perform. Now, regarding this, let me highlight a few things. First of all, nobody should ever feel pressurized because of any demands or anything that is mentioned. See, every day we have a limited number of hours, and if you are able to finish your task in those whatever limited time we have, then that's perfectly fine. Now, sometimes once in a while you need to do some extra work, but if that is what you are being you are being asked to do every day, then that's probably not a good sign. Then sometimes those places are a little bit toxic, but generally speaking, most of the requests are quite reasonable. They just ask you to engage in research and teaching and do it honestly. If all the educators do a very good job of actually focusing on research and teaching and not spending some time drinking tea and more time during lunch, that sometimes helps, although that's not what many people do. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody at all. I'm just saying that everybody, including myself, all of us need to optimize our time. So we have to decide, I'm going to start working at 9 o'clock and I have to finish this task by whatever 5 o'clock. Then how should I optimize my time? And you should enjoy the process. See, if you enjoy a process, there is really no way to feel burdened or pressurized. If you love research, you will do it by yourself. You don't need to be pressurized. You'll publish without anybody telling you to publish. You will teach fantastically without anybody coming to your teaching session and monitoring you. So the basic idea is very simple. Enjoy your work. Do what you enjoy and enjoy what you do. I'll repeat the sentence. Do what you enjoy and enjoy what you do. If you do this, if you follow this guideline, you will never feel pressurized. In my entire career, I have never feel pressurized. Probably in the beginning of my career, when I was a PhD student, that time I was not so much mature. That time maybe a little bit, I was feeling a little bit pressurized because I was in a new country, in a new culture. There are so many variables. That is kind of normal. But even then, there also I developed a lot of resilience, and I was able to publish my first paper in the Journal of Biological Chemistry, which is a very high H index journal. And I got my PhD and did my postdoc. So I did work under pressure, and I was still able to successfully handle the situation. And in fact, I don't call it pressure at all. I call it positive motivation. And people should avoid using the term pressure. They should just keep themselves motivated, and anybody who tells them to do something, just call it positive motivation or inspiration, whichever word you prefer. And then if you do it that way, that will add more meaning to everybody's life. Now before going to the next slide, let me tell you the Japanese way of doing things. See, Japanese people plan a lot and then they implement quickly. Many places I've been to, what they do is not the developed countries. I mean, I've not been to many places. I've mostly been to the United States, but I've talked to people from various places. But what I've seen is people spend very little time in planning and they quickly implement it because they are in a haste to finish it. Never do that. Everybody needs to plan meticulously. If you plan very carefully, then the implementation is guaranteed to be smooth, barring a few examples. So the Japanese way of doing thing is to plan very carefully. Look for trouble areas. What could go wrong? You know, look for all of those things. Then make such a fantastic plan that the implementation has to be smooth. That's the Japanese way of doing things. If you do it that way, you'll not feel pressurized and you'll perform really well. You'll produce outstanding results. That's for sure. All right. Now, many people are afraid of new technologies and trends. So let's say the university says that you have to start using a new software. Now, as soon as people see the first email, they are immediately going to see a rise in their blood pressure. They'll immediately call someone and say, oh my God, now we are supposed to learn this new software. I don't have time for this. They blah, 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 and all those things start. No, I would never I would never go by that approach, never adopt that approach. So as teachers and as students, we need to overcome that inertia. And in fact, I would say that instead of feeling challenged by new technology and trends and patterns, we should always stay ahead of everything. So if they ask you to learn one software, why don't you learn two, so that you feel so confident that your entire existence at the university will be full of confidence. Because while people are struggling with that one software, you already know two. So that is my strategy. When people ask me to do X things, I do X plus 1. I don't like to do X minus 1. When people ask me to do Y things, I do Y plus 2. I don't like to do Y or Y minus 1. So always, you have to do a little bit more than what you have been asked for. If you do that, you will always stay ahead. Then you will be familiar with new technology, new trends, new software programs, whatever is new, and there should be no resistance to change. See, people who are dynamic will never resist change. In fact, they'll be welcoming change, because change is what guarantees progress. If there is no change, there is no progress. If there is no change, nothing can proceed in the right direction. So we have to have change, we have to have new technology, we should observe new trends, and then proceed in that direction in order to attain success. All right. Now, one more concern, a very common concern, is that we have outdated curricula. Now, this is a very common problem. Like, what happens is, many institutes, the educators are quite dynamic and they want to see some new additions to the existing curricula. They want to see some new things in the daily lectures, and so they want to add a lot of those things, but they are not able to do it because the board of studies has only recommended certain things. That's okay. See, board of studies does recommendations and all of those things, that those things are all fine. They're part of an administrative thing. But as an educator, if you feel that you want to add a few things to the existing curriculum, you can always make a list of all of those things, all the changes that you wish to implement, and you can always implement it in your classroom and in your laboratory. There's absolutely no rule that would prevent you from doing that, neither UGC nor AICTE. See, if you are an innovator and you want to try lots of different techniques, you can always go for that. Just make sure you discuss this with the appropriate stakeholders at your institute, because you don't want to suddenly surprise people and then start all those things. So always speak about all of your plans with people. take people in, earn their confidence. Once you get their confidence, once they feel confident about you, they'll let you go ahead with your plans. And sometimes what happens is, even if you propose some changes and you tell your management or the committee that you want to see these changes implemented in that year, sometimes they'll actually allow you if you are quite passionate about your tasks, and you really want to see some of those activities in your schedule, weekly schedule, daily schedule, whatever are your plans, you can always get them, get those activities included. So it's not a very difficult thing. You can always go for that. I'll share a very quick example. My advisor, when I was doing my PhD, during PhD we used to follow a certain textbook, and but that was just one small textbook. Most of the things that he used to teach us, he used to teach us from actual journal articles. So he used to actually discuss some articles and then ask us some questions. And even the examination, our exams were based on things that were published in journals. So it was a very different kind of a, it used to be a very different classroom session for us. So now nowhere in the UIC curriculum is it written, I've not seen it anywhere, written anywhere, that chemistry 545 or whatever was the course name, I forgot the course name, course number, but it should be taught by referring to published articles from journals. It doesn't say it anywhere officially. But even then, the professor was teaching us a lot of things from journals. He used to follow a textbook, yes, but he also used to teach a lot of things from published articles. They could be review articles, they could be research articles, so many things. So yeah, that flexibility is always there, as long as you communicate your these thoughts and ideas to people, to the right appropriate stakeholders. I don't anticipate any issue in this area. So if you feel passionate about something, talk to people about it, get those things approved. And sometimes an approval is not even required. They'll say, yeah, just go ahead, it's your classroom, just do it your way. So depending on the context, depending on where you are working, you can get those things. But yes, do pursue it. If you feel passionate about it, do pursue it. Now, inadequate resources. Now, sometimes what happens is uh, certain departments, let's say I'm the director of a certain department. It could be chemistry, or it could be medicine, it could be engineering, it could be computer science or pharmacy. I'll always have my own unique set of requirements for my students and for my researchers. So are those requirements being met? That's the question. So very first thing you have to do is you have to make a list. Now, what are the requirements that are being met? Do we have a GCMS? Do we have, just an example, you don't need to have a GCMS, but I'm just saying, do we have a GCMS? Do we have whatever equipment you require for doing certain experiments? Do we have them? Yes or no? If you have them, great. If you don't have them, then you have to make a list. Then you have to share that list with experts. Then you have to draft a proposal. And if your institute is eligible for grants, now see, some institutes are not initially eligible for government funding, but eventually they become eligible for government funding. But till the time they become eligible, they need some funds. Those funds are usually provided by the institute itself, or you have to find some ways. Generally institute takes care of it. But then you need to identify these things at the right time, and just make sure the appropriate stakeholders are made aware of your requirements. And once you share these lists or requests with the institute, most of the times if you do a decent job, they'll definitely honor your request. Let me share an example. uh, so when I was taking care of a the PhD program at Ark University in Gujarat, many of the directors there requested me that they wanted some equipment upgrades. So then I had a meeting with various directors, and then I asked each of them to make a list. Then I compiled all of those lists into a grand list, and then there was some back and forth, and we finally shortlisted some instruments. And once we identified the right type of research equipment, I sat down and I basically pulled a lot of information from various departments, and then I wrote a research proposal. I wrote a research proposal. I presented it several times. I presented it to management. I presented it to various other stakeholders, including directors, all sorts of people. And I'm really happy to let you know that at the end of the entire process, it took about 6 months from the time I started collecting information and working on my proposal to the finalization. But after 6 months, we got it approved, and after a lot of relentless effort, and I also thank the management for their approval. A research center was approved, and we basically had the space and the building, so we did not have to invest on real estate and all those things. So we directly bought equipment worth half a crore. So we bought research equipment worth rupees 50 lakh, and then luckily around that time, now they say sometimes chance favors the prepared mind. So luckily around that time, Nobel laureate Dr. Ada Yonath, she's an Israeli Nobel laureate, she was in town. So it just came to my mind, like, why not invite her? So I just emailed her, and then Pat came her reply. She immediately replied saying that yes, why not, I would be happy to come to your university and deliver a seminar, and then I would also be happy to inaugurate the research center. So now that inauguration, that research center has her name. It really worked out well. The whole research proposal was approved. So now they have adequate resources to do their experiments. Plus, it was inaugurated by a Nobel laureate, so that also helps in a lot of other areas. So that's how. If you don't have resources, you have to really make it a point to get resources. How you get it depends. You could get it from a government grant. You could ask, if you're not eligible for a government grant, you have to request management to give it to you. There are so many ways of doing it. But essentially what you have to do is you have to identify what is missing, then see what is urgent, what is not so urgent, prioritize your things, prioritize your purchases, and then go for those resources. That's how you go about doing things. So you'll never be running, so basically you'll not be facing this problem of inadequate resources. All right. So need for liberal funds. Now sometimes what happens is universities have enough facilities, they have the right infrastructure, they have good instructors, the students are also very diligent, but sometimes some tiny things here and there are missing. Like for example, small funds to purchase a few things. Let's say I want to organize a webinar and I need some tiny amount of money to organize the webinar, or one of my students who is not working on my research project, so I cannot give him funds from my research grant because he's not working on my research, the project related to my research grant, but he wants to print his research poster, and it is quite costly, and he's not able to afford it. So I want to give money to my student. So how do I do that? So for all of these things, I'm just giving some random examples. These are not the actual examples that you may see, but just some random examples that came to my mind. But for all of these, if we have liberal funds, like let's say every month your institute gives you whatever 1,000 rupees to take care of some expenses, and of course you have to be very truthful, and you have to spend it at the right place, you have to retain the receipts, and you have to give it to your administration. So that is there. I'm not saying that you have to cheat or anything. You have to be very truthful, because at the end of the day, there is nothing more precious than being truthful. You have to be truthful to yourself, you have to be truthful to your institute. But what we require here is some liberal funds, so that educators don't have to run around, they don't have to go from here to there signing 10 forms to get like 50 rupees and all those things. So good thing is many institutes in fact have such things in place, and they allow educators to get hold of some liberal funds, and that's how they basically facilitated the entire process, which is very good. So if something like this exists at your institute, great. Sometimes you can also apply for external funding. Like for example, when I was in Gujarat, there used to be an this thing funding agency called Guj Coast, and they used to give funds for small webinars and seminars. So you can also check whatever things are available in your state. From it, those things vary from state to state. All right, organizational politics. Now, I'm sure I'm not an expert in this area, but luckily, Nikhat madam is actually a very well-known expert in this area. She has worked in this area a lot. This is a very common thing in the Indian academics in many institutes. It's not that common in industry or in some other countries, but it's kind of a little more common, fairly common in Indian academic institutions. Now, for some people it's like a daily headache. Like I have to go to work and I have to see this really crazy person every day, and my blood pressure increases every day as soon as I see the person. How do I fix this? I don't want to leave this job because my family only wants to stay here, and then there are so many complications. But then don't make it complicated, and first of all, don't increase your blood pressure. That's the last thing you should do. You have the right to remain happy. Everybody has the right to be happy. If anybody is taking that right away from you, that is not the right thing. So see it's very simple. Let's say some person is not behaving correctly, some person is not behaving appropriately. If you react to that, then the person will feel empowered. See, the entire thing depends on how you react. If somebody insults you, if somebody says something bad to you, it is absolutely meaningless and powerless without your reaction. If you react, then the entire power rests with that person who is insulting you. But if you just simply refuse to react, if you just laugh it off, you say, haha, it doesn't bother me. So then you're the happiest person on earth, because you don't seem to be bothered by what other people are doing. You're just happy and contented doing your own work. You are very peaceful person. You like innovation. You don't care about what people are doing. I mean, you should care about what people are doing, but not like discuss people. You discuss ideas. So then that's an ideal situation. But then let me also highlight something else. When I was working at the National Institutes of Health, they used to have something called as an ombudsman service. So what's an ombudsman service? It's like a person who comes to the institute, and you can visit the person anonymously, meaning the person need not know who has visited, or sometimes they know but they don't reveal it to others. So and mostly, as far as I know, they don't ask you your name. They just ask you what is your concern. So like that, if some third party person, some person like that comes to your institute, and you share your problems with that person, that is one way of doing it. Of course, if something serious is going on, then you must report to HR or to the ombudsman or to both, ideally, because and you should ignore, but you should not forget. They say forgive but do not forget, and that's a very smart thing. You should forgive but don't forget. Why? Because if the person does it once, the person is also likely to do it one more time. The person is likely to do it 5 more times, 10 more times. Are you going to constantly forgive and move on? That's not very practical, right? I mean, it looks great in textbooks, but is it practical? I don't think so. So you should forgive. That's fine. Forgiving people is a great attribute, a very noble thing to do. But don't forget. Don't forget. Report it to HR. HR is a fantastic system. They are there to help you. So make sure you report it to HR. Make sure you report to ombudsman, and get things resolved. Organizational politics exists, yes, but we have to deal with it. We cannot really say that we don't want to work in a place where such things are not there. Many places it's there, but you have to deal with it. How? Remain cheerful, be positive, don't be worried about what people are saying, because no matter what you do, you have no control over what people are going to say behind your back. They'll always say great things in front of you, but they may or may not say the same things when you go away. So don't be worried, because anyway, you have no control over what other people are saying, but you do have full control over your feelings. If you don't react, organizational politics is never going to hurt you, regardless of what happens. All right. So moving on to the next slide, the pandemic. Now, this is basically a problem that is being faced by students as well as educators. It's a very common problem. It's a overlap, like teachers and students are facing the same problem. Like now, let's say I'm a teacher and I want to demonstrate an experiment. How do I demonstrate it on Google Meet or Microsoft? What is that? Teams. It's very difficult, right? You have to. So let's say you're a scientist, you're an engineer, you want to touch and feel the instrument and equipment. I know it's a huge challenge, but luckily things have started going back to normal in India. I just saw the graph, and the trend shows that cases are decreasing, although once in a while they tend to increase. But luckily in India, I think I don't know, probably Indians are very strong and resistant, because we don't seem to have that much of a problem with coronavirus. Having said that, don't suddenly stop wearing your mask. Otherwise, at the end of this session, everybody will like blame me. Said that Dr. Nikhil Gokhale said that Indians don't need to worry and then we'll not wear our mask. No, don't do that, because there are some mutant strains that, in fact, may be dangerous, and some of them I think have arrived. So we have to be careful. Okay, so let's not digress too much. Now, the pandemic. There are many challenges that we face during the pandemic. One is work-life balance. For some, it is a great opportunity. For some, it is not a great opportunity. So it depends. Everybody's condition is unique. So we have to see what's the optimal solution. But regardless of where you are and what your situation is, you have to always find solutions. And in these times, technology can come to your help. Technology can come to your rescue. So try to, you make maximum use of technology to find solutions to your problems. And now I fully understand that not everything can be done at home, but there are always ways to go about. And depending on the situation, you can always find intelligent solutions. All right, so moving on to the next slide, a skewed ratio. Now, what is a skewed ratio? So let's say in my class, I have
Sorry to interrupt you, sir. Sorry to interrupt you, sir.
yeah.
Actually, I am getting one slide only since the beginning of this lecture. I am not getting other slides.
And you're not getting. Okay, how
Nay,
about
server, I think you check from your end because we are able to see the slides. Other participants, if you can help us out.
Yes, we can see.
Yes, everything is going on nicely.
Okay. So, server, I think it is your problem. You have to sort it out.
Okay.
Sir, you can continue, sir.
All right. Okay, so some students have this problem with the skewed ratio. So what do I mean by skewed ratio? So let's say I'm running, I'm basically teaching some students, and there are 20 students in my class, and I am the only instructor. So the ratio is 1:20. So there's one instructor and 20 students. But what if there is one instructor and 75 students, and there are 75 students? So the ratio is 1:75. So that's a very skewed ratio. So there are like too many students and just like one instructor. So in that case, what happens is, if 75 students attend my lecture, and at the end of the lecture, how will I have enough time to answer the queries of all 75 students? That's very difficult, right? And this happens because many institutes have a lot of admissions, and there are various reasons. But then there's a solution. There is a very smart solution for this. Although we cannot have too much of a role in deciding how many students to admit and all those things as educators, we can at least try to suggest a solution or arrive at a solution by having these learning centers. So if you start a learning center, it helps a lot. Now, what is a learning center? Now, let me give you my own example. When I was working as a teaching assistant at the University of Illinois at Chicago, I used to teach students. So let's say I used to have like 2-3 sessions in a week, per week. And then apart from my classroom sessions, I used to go and sit at the learning center. There used to be a table and 5 chairs. I used to sit there with my reading material. I used to keep reading journal articles, and then I used to sit there for 1 hour, at least 2 to 3 times per week. I think it was thrice a week. And then students used to come there with their queries, and they used to ask me. Now, I was not the only person. There were at least like 20 other teaching assistants. So everybody used to have students, and then students found that was a really helpful activity, because let's say a student does not get chance in the classroom to ask a question, the student can ask the same question in the learning center. You have an entire hour, and they can go home, do their work, and only come there with their specific questions. So because they come there with their specific questions, you can quickly solve the question and go to the next student. Then at a time you can handle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Within an hour you can handle a lot of students. They all go home happy. Their problems get addressed. At the same time, you feel happy as an educator because you were there at the learning center and you could help your students. So if there is a skewed ratio in your classroom, this is how you can fix it, by having learning centers. And you have to sit there in the learning center. You can keep doing your activities like filling in attendance sheets or what, I don't know, whatever activities are there. Like you have the rough attendance sheet, then you have to make some entry into another, whatever is the process, I'm not sure. Because I have myself never done that. So I'm just saying, but whatever is that activity, you can keep doing it there. So that this is called as parallel processing. You keep doing one thing, and if students come in to ask queries, you can answer them there, or you can just invite them to your office. That's even more, like much more simpler than going to learning center. If you have desk space and you have an office, invite them to your office and let them ask them their questions there. So that's how you fix this. Now, the next problem, no mentor. Now, what happens is students have a lot of queries. They need not always be related to science, engineering, management, or any subject area per se. They could also have some general queries like, how should I go about deciding the future of my career? Like what's the best career option for me? And what is the best way to study? These are all like general questions, not very much related to any subject as such. But for all of these things, mentorship helps a lot. So we really need effective mentors, because mentors can tremendously boost student confidence. And when you boost somebody's confidence, they literally shine like crazy. They can do something very outstanding and very exclusive and interesting. Nowadays, luckily, mentorship, even during the pandemic, it's entirely possible to mentor people. You can use technology, and just like I said in one of my previous slides, you have to make all of us, not just you, me, all of us have to make maximum use of technology to address whatever problems we face. So you can be effective mentors even when you're located at some remote place. You don't have to be in front of the person, but yes, mentorship is required, because unless you have a proper mentor who can guide you, it's very difficult these days for students to decide, because there are so many options. They are being bombarded with tons of information, and then they're really not sure what to do. And that's where mentors come into picture. So I would definitely say that every student needs to be assigned a mentor, or at least the student or the educator or the institute must make it a point to identify mentors. So that's the role of a mentor. And yes, we need to be responsible mentors. Now, student counseling. Now, a few days ago, I was actually surprised when I came across a very interesting term. It's called Facebook depression. And many of the students attending colleges and universities these days are facing this problem. It's called social media depression or Facebook depression. Now, I had no idea what this term meant until recently. So I tried to investigate further. Like, what exactly is Facebook depression? Why would people should get excited after using Facebook, na ki get depressed? So I was not sure. I myself, I'm not there on Facebook, so I don't know what happens there. Like I joined once because my family requested, but I like to meet people by visiting their houses and by talking to them on the phone and WhatsApp. But I don't use Facebook much, because I don't find it thrilling to just keep liking somebody's photos and then ask people to like your photos. So I did rather do something more meaningful and talk to people, invite them to my house, go to their house. During the pandemic, I can always talk to them on the phone. Yeah, so coming back to the topic, so what is Facebook depression? Facebook depression is, let's say one of your students posts a photo on Facebook, and he or she has 500 Facebook friends. Out of those 500, only 20 of them like his or her photo. So they immediately feel depressed, like, oh my God, I have 500 friends. So 480 of them betrayed with me. Only 20 liked me. And they get depressed. Now, such a silly reason. Isn't it a silly reason? But yes, it affects their academics. It actually depresses them to the point that they seriously start thinking of doing all sorts of miserable things, including suicide. So I'm not saying it's very common, but these days the youth are getting depressed by a lot of silly things, like something called social media depression, Facebook depression. So this is where you need student counseling. Now the mentor alone will not be able to handle this, or the teacher alone will not be able to handle this. You need some specialized people with training in certain areas. Like, for example, people who know what is psychological counseling, those people can actually help. Mediators, psychological counselors. So your institute probably can do a favor to the students by appointing a formal psychological counselor, and let the person visit your institute at least once every month, once or twice, depending on the requirement. And then the students should be asked to go there and visit the counselor anonymously. So the counselor should not know the name of the student, and the student should not know who is coming and the details and all those things. So the meeting should be anonymous, and it should be at such a place where there are no security cameras. So you have to make sure that the students feel really safe. So when they are going there, nobody should see them. So you have to, I know it's a little bit tricky, but it can be done. I'm not saying it cannot be done. It can be done. And if you organize such counseling sessions, the number of cases where you will go down actually. Cases of Facebook depression and depressed students and students doing silly things will go down. This is very important. Now, why are we discussing it here? Because it has actually started affecting their academics. And that's why I thought of bringing it up here in my presentation. All right, next one. Now, many students face this issue, communication issue. Now, there is really no excuse these days. And see, if you can learn science, if you can learn engineering, you can learn management, you can learn physiotherapy and pharmacy and chemistry. If you can master these subjects, mastering a language is not that difficult. You don't need to go to any specialized laboratory to learn language, right? You can very easily learn it at home from the comfort of your home. So learning a language is not a problem. So people who give such excuses, I feel that they should take a little bit more effort. I'll give you an example. One of my friends, he came from a remote village in India, yet he went to Germany for his PhD on a scholarship, and he learned German actually. He did not even go to an English medium school. He did his entire education in a Marathi medium school, yet he not only learned English, but he also learned German. And now he has got his PhD, he is working in a pharmaceutical company in India. So what is the take-home message here? That students, when they complain about these things, tell them that there is no excuse available to them. They have to make use of all the free resources that are made available to them. And then they have to make sure that they polish their communication skills. It's not a problem anymore. Now, a slightly different area, technical communication. Now, regular communication is what we have on a daily basis, like written communication, oral communication, emails. Technical communication is when you write a paper, a research article, or a grant, or a patent application, or you try to deliver a webinar. All those are, all those places, all those areas, you need technical communication. Now, if you are a very sound technical communicator, you are good in technical communication, you will be able to draft really good research manuscripts. You will be able to draft good patent applications. You will be able to speak well. So it helps a lot. Now, how can you own these skills? There are various ways of doing it. The first thing I always tell people is keep reading, keep reading, keep reading. You have to keep reading. But what should you read? Don't read journals, don't read articles published in dubious journals. Don't read something that is of dubious quality. Read something that is published in good places. Like, for example, yesterday I came across an article published in the reputed journal Nature. Then day before yesterday, I read something on ScienceDaily.com. ScienceDaily.com, by the way, is a fantastic website. If you want to learn about the latest innovations in the field of science, engineering, technology, medicine, and so many other areas, you can visit this website. It's called ScienceDaily.com. Very resourceful website. And if you keep reading such articles and really fantastic journals and all these things, you can in fact get good in this area. Which area? Technical communication. So you'll be able to communicate well with your target audience. So in this case, your target audience will be your article readers, or the listeners at your conference, or the people who read your patent, the granted patent, mostly companies, because they might want to license the patent and pay you the fees, pay you the royalty. So how do we handle this? Well, you can have staff at your institute, and the staff can basically run programs and teach some of these things to their students, like technical writing, how to write a manuscript. I remember when I was a PhD student, no, not my boss, but another PhD advisor, she was actually training her students. She was training her students how to do grant writing, and she was really good at it. So the students massively benefited from that activity. So similarly, you can also appoint somebody at your institute, and you can ask the person to train your students in the area of technical communication, regular communication as well as technical communication. Now, ESL is, what is ESL? English, wherever English is a second language, wherever English is a second language, you have to have some sessions for the ESL audience. So if English is not your first language, then you need some help sometimes. So that's where these ESL people come into picture, and they can help everyone else in the area of regular communication and technical communication. All right, next one. Now, I was instrumental in coordinating this conference on the International Conference on Transformations in Engineering Education back when I was working at Arkan Institute in Gujarat. And there, one of the recurring themes was that today's students, today's engineering graduates, very specifically they mentioned about engineering, the field of engineering, because the conference was on engineering education. They said that today's graduating engineers lack the required soft skills. Now, what are soft skills? Soft skills don't necessarily mean just communication. Soft skills is, basically a set of skills that you own at your institute or at a special training program by merely observing a few things. Now, some examples like how to initiate a conversation, how to start talking to people. If there is a conflict, how to manage the conflict, how to cope with stress. Now, how to handle tricky situations. Now, sometimes just by observing other people, you can learn a lot of these things. You can imbibe a lot of soft skills. But not everybody is able to do that. Not everybody has the capacity to do that. Not everybody has the right exposure on the bandwidth. However, although I would say a lot of people do have exposure these days, but not everybody has the bandwidth to digest it. So for that, what you can do is, at your institute, you can start some programs to develop soft skills. So basically, train the students at least once every month, or hold some sessions once a week, whatever is the optimal frequency, and try to impart this training to them. You'll be surprised, in Bangalore there are a lot of finishing schools. What are these finishing schools? Finishing schools, they teach you what students don't get taught in universities and colleges. They basically teach them soft skills. So if your institute can hire some professionals and take care of soft skills, then the engineering students that graduate from your college or university will really perform well, because they are not only familiar with the concepts of engineering, they are also familiar with soft skills. And the day they step into industry, from day one, they'll be very professional. So this is how you can fix it. All right, the next one, reduced attention span. Now, this is a very common occurrence these days. Now, why do we see this? Because see, what happens is students use their smartphones a lot these days. They're always on Facebook and whatever, Instagram, and all these places, and they keep scrolling very rapidly. Their attention span is so tiny that once they sit down and start reading a book, by the time they finish a page, they are like, oh, let me quickly check if I have some message on WhatsApp or somebody liked my photo on Facebook. This is what they're doing these days. So all these things are real, and we have to find solutions to these problems. I'm very happy. I really I became so happy when I came across a recent report saying that in the United Kingdom, people are deactivating their Facebook profiles. They are simply throwing away Facebook. They don't want Facebook. They are tired of Facebook. I was never there on Facebook, so I don't have to. I was there like once, and then I deactivated it. And so what I do is, if my family tells me to visit some page, I just activate my profile, visit it, immediately deactivate it, because I don't need Facebook. So coming back to the topic, basically, if you see that your students have reduced attention spans, you can seek behavioral therapy. And now you'll ask me, how can we do all of these things at the university? We are not here to fix these things. But see, you can fix all of these things in one shot. How? Just hire a professional counselor. The professional counselor will increase their attention span. The professional counselor will take care of things like Facebook depression. The professional counselor will take care of serious emotional issues. The professional counselor will also take care of any other hurdles or impediments that might be obstructing the student's path. So just by hiring one person, you can fix all of these problems, or at least many of these problems. So one of the problems, at a reduced attention span, yeah, you can always appoint counselors and you can take care of this issue. So that's how you can go about fixing this problem. All right, the next one, inadequate exposure. Now, that's not really an excuse anymore. People have a lot of exposure to a lot of free resources these days. Even in villages, I've seen students there have access to lots of good resources, and so that's not a problem anymore. The challenge nowadays is to make use of the knowledge to innovate. And just like we saw in the morning session, it is our job to innovate. So if students give me this excuse, I'm not going to buy it. They do have enough exposure. If they want to listen to a lecture delivered by a professor from Harvard or MIT, they can very well do that. Just go to the YouTube channel and go and check the MIT channel or Harvard YouTube channel. They have tons of videos uploaded there. You can go and check any of those videos. You can also take courses on what's that website, Coursera and Udemy, and they have all like Western instructors, people with fantastic credentials. So you can take that, and the cost is not much. They always, I'm kind of surprised. I don't know how they have a permanent discount in place. Every time I go to Udemy, it's like they say the actual price is 12,000 rupees, and today they are giving it for 300 rupees. I visit it after 1 month, it's the same thing. I don't know how they give a permanent discount, whether it's real or not, but it's a kind of a marketing technique. But the take home message here is that everybody has enough exposure. So if somebody is saying that they don't have enough exposure to knowledge, that's not a legitimate excuse. They have to take some effort to find out the right resources, and they will get it. I don't think that's a problem anymore. All right, so moving on to the next slide. All right, so I think that's all I had to say in the first half of the session. And let's see, if you have any questions, let me know. And then we'll immediately start with the remainder of today's session.
Yeah, there are questions. There are lots of questions. I'm Praveen this side. And before I ask any question, I need to ask Nikhat ma'am, how much time do we have even to ask questions?
Sir, we have time till 4 o'clock.
Okay.
If sir is okay, then we can exceed also because this is last session. And after this, there is no session. So, sir, Nikhil sir, if you do not have any problem,
Yeah, that's fine.
okay.
That's fine with me.
Nikhil sir is fine, sir. You can proceed with the question, sir.
Okay.
Still, we have half an hour, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's too much. I don't have so many questions.
Okay, then okay, sir. Then we will be able to wind up at 4 o'clock.
Okay. Uh, Firstly, a wonderful, wonderful session. Thank you very much.
And
And
thanks for the kind words.
and there were so many things you touched. So initially I thought that I'll be asking questions on this and this and this, and then later on the questions were so many that I had to jot them down.
Okay.
Firstly, you said that enjoy what you do and do what you enjoy. What I feel is easier said than done.
Okay.
And how to find a right balance? The question is how to find the right balance.
Yeah. So see, the thing is, it may be easier said than done in some cases. But if you really optimize, I mean, and not as in you or me, if people optimize their strategy in such a way that they ensure that whatever they are doing is in the within the constraints of their areas of where they find motivation, then they'll definitely enjoy whatever they're doing. And sometimes, no doubt, there are instances where we may not necessarily enjoy what we are doing. Although I would still say that if you find the right balance, I mean, if you, let's say, let's take a concrete example. Let's say I'm working in the area of, let's say I'm working in the area of biochemistry, and I find that scientific editing is very interesting. So what I decide is I decide to freelance for a firm that does scientific editing, and I'm really enjoying the activity. So what I'm doing essentially is I'm doing chemistry, and I enjoy chemistry. I enjoy doing biochemistry, but I also enjoy doing scientific editing. So now I have multiple areas where I can focus. Biochemistry will be one area, scientific editing will be another area. So I can derive my joy from all of these areas, many of these areas. I don't have to restrict myself to one area. So extending the same analogy, what we can say is, if you feel that one particular area is not giving you enough joy, you can always spread out and try to seek more options within the constraint of your expertise. This is just one example. So if you do that and diversify those things, then even by staying within your constraint, within your area of expertise, you can still derive the same joy by doing multiple activities. I'm not saying that this is what everybody should do at all the times, but just an example. And so that is one approach. And the second approach is to basically ensure a good match. Now, if somebody feels that honestly something is not really a match for them, then it's best to not go for that option in the first place. If accidentally you venture in the territory, then you can definitely try to find some solutions. Now, but in most of the cases, when people decide to do something and they land up with that, and then most of the people, they tend to be happy with what they're doing, and they derive the pleasure from that. But if for some unfortunate reasons they are not able to get that kind of joy from that one area, just like I said, you can always expand your horizons. So expanding the horizon is the key to success in that case.
Thank you very much. Nicely answered, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
It solved my query. Another question is, you said that we should do the things Japanese way.
Okay.
So, see, we as Indians, I'm an Indian national. I work 8 hours a day, but Japanese work 12 to 14 hours a day. How do we compete that way?
Yeah, well, what I meant to say by Japanese way is I actually only like the Yeah, the planning and Kaizen part, when it comes to Japanese way of implementing things, just like you said, working extra hours is something I'm totally against. Why? Because if you work for 12 hours or 14 hours instead of 8 hours, you are being unfair to your family. And that is a very dangerous thing to do. It's very unfair to your family. So I would never ask people to work in that kind of a Japanese way where you work for 14 or 16 hours, because it's not fair. No doubt your nation will prosper within lesser amount of time, but it's not fair to your family. Ask some people in Japan. Like many people in Japan face issues with family life, and there are some other issues. So what I'm saying is, and I had seen a very interesting cartoon on this. Let me share that cartoon with you. I mean, I cannot share the cartoon, but the content of that. One person is saying to the other, he's kind of bragging. So, my boss is very happy about me. I work for 14 hours a day, and you seem to work for only 8 hours a day. So, you know what reply the person gives the other person who works for 8 hours a day? He says, whatever work I finish doing in 8 hours, it takes 14 hours for you to finish the work. Now, who is more efficient? That's a very smart answer. So what it essentially boils down to, if all of us plan our things in the Japanese way and implement it within 8 hours, we can work in the proper way. Our Indian way would be to work in during those 8 hours, but work very efficiently like the Japanese. So we don't have to work like the Japanese for 14 hours, but we can work efficiently like the Japanese hours during those 8 hours. That was the take home message.
So nice. Thank you. I'm getting a. Thank you, Nikhat ma'am, for allowing me. Thank you, Nikhat.
All right. Welcome.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, I find some faculties are not good at research.
Okay.
But is there any possibilities of having flexibilities? Maybe they can take some extra theories. And so, because recently one of my neighbor is a very good staff. I feel envy about his teaching. He's very good for teaching faculty, but unfortunately he couldn't make it up in the research. So he was sent out of the institutions. Okay. So I personally feel that we lost a valuable faculty. Okay. So is there any possibilities of making some flexibility so that those who are good at research, they can do research. Others, they can able to take some extra theory, something like that to compensate that.
Okay. Now, let me ask you a question. Is your institute primarily a research institute or a teaching institute?
Teaching and research.
Okay, both. All right. Okay. Now, this question is a little bit complicated to handle. I'll tell you why. Because on the one hand, you have UGC, University Grants Commission, saying that a certain number of publications need to be out there, and then for getting promotion you need to have some publications. At the same time, on the other hand, now I'm not sure, I need to completely investigate the situation and see what kind of resources are available, what is the person's expertise. And so for me to give a very concrete suggestion or answer would be slightly difficult unless and until I have the whole picture in front of me. Like ideally what I would like to do is, before addressing the question, I would like to meet the person. I would like to see what are his skill sets. I would like to see what is it that kept him from doing meaningful research. Why did he not excel in research? Was there any tiny thing that could have been fixed? All of those things, sometimes there are some minor issues here and there which, if fixed, the person can actually excel in the research.
That's right. But you have been to other universities. I'm just asking, is there this kind of system exist in any universities?
Yeah. So in the United States, to very specifically answer your question, there are two kinds of faculty members: the research faculty and teaching faculty. What research faculty do is they exclusively focus on research and little bit on teaching, and the teaching faculty mainly teach undergrads, and they exclusively focus on teaching because they are very good teachers, and little bit on research. So that kind of a division is there in the United States. Within the same university, like I did my PhD from University of Illinois Chicago. There we had research faculty, and we also had instructors or teaching facilities. That distinction is very much possible. So if the same model can be adopted, it's well and good. I think that could be done at many places.
But it's not happening in India. It is not prevailing in Indian universities.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what's the best fix for that, but I think most of the times now, if you see colleges, they mainly focus on like 4-year degree colleges. They mainly focus on teaching more, whereas if it's a university, it like PhD granting university, they focus more on research. So many times people who are good in teaching, they probably prefer to go to teach at colleges, whereas if they are more inclined towards research, then they go and join some research granting university. So that choice is there, but regardless of that, I mean, the proper way to handle it is to have a good match between your skill set and what the expectations. So if you're good at a certain thing, then I think that's what you should follow. Now, not everybody. The other way is also true. Now, some people really excel in research. They're really good in research, but they're not good teachers at all. Like, I'll give you an example. We had a professor in the United States. He was there at UIC. He was excellent in research, organic chemistry research, but he was a very bad teacher. And you'll be surprised to know this happened in the United States. But it happens. And so that's what I'm saying. There should be. So what they probably did is eventually they. I think what the university administration did is they gave the lesser courses, or somebody else taught the course, or something happened. So basically, they did the same thing. They found a match. The person is good at research, let him or her do research. The person is good at teaching, let him or her do teaching. Now, I'm not sure when we can implement it, but that would be like a really ideal scenario. Till that time, what we as individuals can do is we ourselves can decide, we can introspect and see, am I good at research? Let me pursue it. Am I good at teaching? Let me pursue that.
Yeah, I find all the tier one engineering colleges, especially in South, they're actually looking for NIRF ranking, NBA, all these things looking. So that they're looking only the projects and publication details much. They don't really look into the teaching. Other things is not looked up much. That is why what happened is generally faculties are compromising teaching and spending more time on research and the publications, and that is what
Yeah.
happening. I'm seeing all these things in my own institutions. So
Yeah.
what do you feel about it?
No, that's a very legitimate observation. See, anywhere if teaching is getting compromised, that's not an ideal situation. Then the first thing that needs to be done is, just like I said in my one of my previous slides, you make a list of your concerns and then initiate a discussion with the appropriate stakeholders. You never know. Sometimes what happens is these people are in touch with lot of high profile people who are working in these national bodies like AICT, UGC, and some ideas somewhere can immediately spark a revolution, and then you can see some radical change in the entire setup. You never know, but it has to start somewhere. So if you see something, say something. So what I would really suggest is, if you feel passionate about this, then why don't you try this approach? Make a list of concerns and start initiating this dialogue with the appropriate stakeholders. At some point, it may gather momentum, and if a lot of people feel that it is a legitimate concern, then it may in fact snowball into a massive mission or something on those lines, and there could be a change in policy. Now, why does UGC and why does AICT keep changing their policy? It's because some people always complain and they report to the agency or the University Grants Commission that this is not working. And when they see a lot of those reports, they decide to change their policy. So I would definitely say that you can start discussing this issue with your institute stakeholders and ask them to take it up. It's a very valid observation. If that's happening and if teaching is getting compromised, that's definitely not an ideal situation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Right.
Any other questions? If you have any questions, please ask sir. Sir is online only. देखो, I think sir, there is a question from Ayub Nabi Khan sir. In
Okay.
universities where teaching and research both are important, teaching hours can be reduced and research hours can be increased for faculty members. For publication in journals with high impact factors, some incentive can be offered to faculty members. This practice can be introduced. Sir has answered, I think.
Okay. What's the question?
Sir, it's not a question, sir. I think sir has answered to Praveen sir.
Okay. Yeah.
In the
Okay.
university where teaching and research both are important, teaching hours can be reduced and research hours can be increased for the faculty members.
Mhm.
For publication in journals with high impact factors, some incentives can be offered to faculty members. This practice can be introduced. Actually, Ayub sir, we are doing this in our campus.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. I mean, you can always incentivize things, and you can not only reward people who are excelling in research and publishing in high impact journals, but you can also reward people who are excelling in the area of teaching or pedagogy, and so that it remains fair. Like you depending on what a person is good at. Let's say he's good at teaching, reward him or her accordingly. Good at research, reward him or her accordingly. Now, just like I said, neither of these areas need to be compromised, because see, why is the US such a popular destination for education? Because the United States has never compromised teaching. The United States has never compromised research. Teaching and research are both important. If you are a good researcher, automatically you teach all the brand new things to your students and develop them into fantastic individuals. So none of these areas should be compromised. And just like I mentioned, if there is a system that's something that needs to be done. But yes, we need to be productive in all areas.
Any other questions? I think so shall we end the session if there is no questions?
No, I'm just finishing the second half. I'll quickly talk about alternative.
Okay, sir. Sorry, sir.
No, no worries. So I'll quickly brief everybody on some of the alternative careers. Now, we have very less time left, but I'll try to wrap up as much as possible. But don't worry, this thing is available online, so I'll make sure I show all the slides so that it will get recorded and you can access it at any time. So what the takeout is, first of all, what are smart alternative careers? Now, everybody doesn't have to follow it, get a degree and then go and do research or go and join industry or a government institute. They can also do many other things. Now, I'm here today to tell you what these many other things are exactly. So let's first define what's an alternative career. So alternative career is something that is not a usual career, like whatever we usually see. Somebody graduates from a college, he or she goes and joins industry, academia. Instead of that, let's say somebody becomes an entrepreneur, or somebody becomes a patent attorney or a patent agent, or somebody starts something else, so that's basically an alternative career. Somebody becomes a product manager, all of those things. Now let's first of all see a few areas. Now we'll directly start with some of the actual alternative careers. Number one, technical communication. Scientific editors, this is a very interesting opportunity. Then STEM communication and outreach, science blogging, science podcasting, and content marketing specialist. All of these areas, the common theme is that you need people who are very good in technical communication, because you need to communicate the technical facts to your target audience using your skills. Now, what do scientific editors do? Scientific editors basically edit manuscripts. Like, for example, I was myself working as a scientific editor, just out of curiosity. I just wanted to see what this is all about. So so I was working for a very famous editing firm, and I used to edit the manuscripts of researchers. Now, what scientific editors do is they kind of rearrange and kind of completely revamp the manuscript, because sometimes what happens is researchers write the manuscript in such a way that it is not in accordance with the journal guidelines. So scientific editors make sure that it is in perfect accordance with the stipulated journal guidelines. The style of referencing and formatting, and the language also should be scientific sounding. It should not be like the kind of language we use on social media. So all those things need to be taken care of, and scientific editors are in huge demand these days, because they do the job of basically formatting a manuscript and bringing it in the right format so that the journal can actually read it. Because many journals, if they see that the journal manuscript is not in the right format, they can in fact reject the manuscript right away. Patent law, now this is a very, very interesting and rewarding career. The very first thing that I need to mention is, in order to become a patent agent, a registered patent agent, you don't need a law degree. You absolutely don't need a law degree. You can have a basic degree from a STEM area, mainly science and engineering, and then you can clear the patent agent exam. The Indian Patent Office website has the information about this exam, and it's conducted every year. There are a few resources and training programs available. You can also check online, and you can become a patent agent. So what do you have to do for that? You have to study on your own, and you have to clear the patent agent exam. Once you do that, you become a registered patent agent. You can in fact work for a very fantastic law firm, and they can pay you really well. So nowadays, people with masters and PhD degrees, they are entering this area, and there are very few people who are technically qualified and who also know how to draft a patent. So if you are able to do that, nothing like it. It's a very lucrative career. It can pay off really well. You can check more about this on the Indian Patent Office website, and there are also plenty of YouTube videos available on this topic. Second one, program officer. One of my friends, he after pursuing his postdoc, he joined the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's a very famous foundation in the United States. So he joined there as a program officer. So he also had an MBA degree. So what he did there is, he was in charge of allocating grants. So many people apply for grants to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the same Bill Gates who is the inventor of Microsoft. So he joined there as a program officer, and his job was to review these grant applications and then take a decision. So if you are good in your technical field, it could be science, engineering, any other technical field. If you have good soft skills and you know how to recognize the intricacies of research, you can be a good program officer, and you can be in charge of grant money allocation. Product management. For this, you need to know all the intricacies and all the very interesting things that are involved in the manufacturing of a product. It could be any kind of product. It could be a pharmaceutical product, an engineering product, or any product. But you need to have deep technical knowledge. If you have that, and if you have the right communication skills, people skills, you can be a good product manager. My friend Toby from Germany, he's a product manager working with a biotech company. His job is to relay technical information about the product to potential clients. And then he does a lot of traveling. He goes to conferences and tries to spread word about the fantastic products that their company manufactures. So mainly PhDs in any field, and also some master's students, but mainly PhDs, they can become good product managers, even if they don't have a management degree. My friend, by the way, Toby, who is working as a product manager in Germany, he does not have a management degree. He has a PhD. All right. So publishing. You can also work as the editor of a STEM journal, but for that you have to be really good in your technical communication. You should have some good research experience, and this is very ideal, a very ideal career for STEM PhDs. What is STEM? STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So if you're from the STEM field, you can be, well, also management. I'm sure pretty much your management also, the area has its own journals. So you can also be an editor for a management journal. But the broad area here is publishing. So you can enter the area of publishing. Next one is recruitment, and I don't need to mention much about that. If you know enough about your students, and if you also are aware of your companies or institutes requirements, you can be a very good recruiter. For that, you don't necessarily need a PhD. You can have a master's degree, but you have to have some specialized skills. You should be able to communicate well. You should be able to identify the right attributes. You should be able to interview people, talk to people. If you have all those skill sets, then you can be a recruiter. All right, next one, science policy. Now, science policy, every country has its own set of policies. Every organization has its own set of policies. Now, who drafts these policies? The policy makers. Now, sometimes the policy makers, they are directly, the lawmakers, but sometimes there are people who serve as mediators between, the lawmakers and people who are actually doing research. So they are basically into science policy. So in order to formulate science policies or scientific policies for a country or organization, you need to take help of these people. So if you are good at drafting, let's say if you are very good at drafting research manuscripts, even then you can be a good policymaker as long as you know the nitty-gritties of the job and you have some, specialized knowledge about that particular area. So you can work definitely as a science policymaker. So you can work. All right. Then operations management is one more very interesting area. So let's say you're an engineer working at an engineering firm, and you know the entire workflow, how that product is manufactured, the end-to-end process you know completely well. You really have good people skills and you're a good leader. Then you can manage the entire end-to-end process and you can be an operations manager. So this is also a job that is in high demand, and it's also one of the alternative careers that you can opt for. All right, the next one. You can also do some business analysis. Now, what is business analysis? First of all, you need to do, now for this particular role, nowadays, of course, they can hire MBAs at any time, but nowadays the trend is to hire more and more PhDs, because what they see is people with a PhD, they can analyze complicated data and they can really draw a lot of conclusion from those data. So they can also do competition analysis. So let's say you have a competitor, you can see what the competitor is doing, and then you can base your analysis on that, and then you can improve your product and kind of do some revamps so as to develop your business. So all of those things can be done when you do business analysis. You could be from any field. Last one, YouTube. And this is one of my favorites. I myself have a YouTube channel. I just, during my spare time, I upload videos to my YouTube channel. It goes by the name Videonium. And I just started it as a hobby. And literally, you'll be surprised that I have myself, I cannot disclose the exact figure because YouTube tells us not to disclose the exact figure. But you can actually earn thousands of dollars. And I have, in fact, earned thousands of dollars on my YouTube channel. I have uploaded 900 videos and so far, and recently I even hired a guitarist. He plays guitar, but I upload a variety of videos, right, from educational videos to entertainment videos and all sorts of things, even recipe videos on how to use Mendeley, videos on what cannot be patented, videos on how to use Excel, Microsoft Excel, all sorts of things, technical, non-technical, entertainment, music, all sorts of things. Just an example. So recently, the CEO of YouTube gave the example of Rachana Ranade. She is a CA from Pune, and she earned $100,000 on YouTube by sharing advice on finance-related matters. So you can go and check her channel, Rachana Ranade. And this year, YouTube said that they are going to prioritize educational content. They are going to make educational content a top priority. So if any of your students are interested in carving a niche in this area, they can do so. This is the right time, because YouTube is rapidly expanding in India, and they really want to have new creators, new YouTubers who make meaningful videos. Now there are two types of YouTubers who make really silly videos, and YouTubers who make meaningful videos. So if you want your students to make something meaningful, ask them to make some interesting videos on how something works, or why you should do something. Like how-to videos are very popular. How to do this, how to do that, those videos are popular. I have myself made a lot of how-to videos, and many other videos related to techniques and those kind of things. So you can monetize those videos, you can put ads on those videos, and there is a particular benchmark. Once you meet that benchmark, YouTube lets you monetize your videos, and you can start earning money from those videos. So sky is the limit. If you want to do it as a full-time activity, and if you want it to be related to your work, then you can do it. If you want to do it as an part-time activity and just for entertainment, then you can just upload lots of entertaining things, comedy videos, music videos, and lots of other videos, because you are anyway doing it as an entertainment activity. But you can also take it up as a full-time activity and entertain people. It's up to you. So so possibilities are endless. So you can discuss this possibility as well with your students. It is a very promising thing. Just tell them one thing, that just don't start and launch your YouTube channel suddenly. They first of all need to get some experience under their belt. They need to earn their degree. They need to work somewhere, and then they can side by side start it as a fun thing. And if it catches up and they see that they are earning a lot of income, then they can pursue it further. But they should still have their full-time job. Unless and until they are like Rachana Ranade and earning $100,000, they should not leave their full-time job. So that's the take-home message. But nevertheless, it's a good alternative career. All right, so I think I'm at the last slide now, and I think that's all I have for you today. I thank you for your time. If there are any questions, please let me know at this point. Okay, so the take-home message here is that we need to start thinking outside the box, and it is perfectly fine to pursue regular careers, but we can also pursue or think about pursuing alternate careers and alternative careers. And you can definitely tell your students to have a look at this video. If they find any of these careers to be rewarding and they want to pursue it, they should definitely find about those careers. Three very prominent alternative careers that come to my mind is, first of all, YouTube, then patent agent. You can be a patent agent, and third one is scientific editing. And besides these three, of course, just like I mentioned, there are other possibilities as well. So with that, I think I end today's session. So if you have any other questions, please let me know. I'm around. And I thank Nikhat madam, and I thank B.S. Abdul Rahman Crescent Institute of Science and Technology for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Thanks to all of you for your time, and I wish you a good day. I'm still here. If you have any questions, you can ask me.
Participants, if you have any question, you can ask sir, or we will end the session.
Ma'am, I have a question. Can I ask it?
Yeah.
Okay. Nikhil sir, the session has been very informative, and it is very impressive also.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind words.
Sir, my question is,
Yeah.
you have rightly said that YouTube is going to focus more on educational content.
Yeah.
And there are other platforms like Udemy and Coursera and many platforms. So
Mhm.
now, how is education industry going to evolve from this point? Now, in terms of online learning and digital education, we are
Yeah.
becoming truly global. So, what are
Yeah.
the opportunities for us to explore
Yeah.
without quitting our jobs or without leaving the career? As you have rightly said, that we can
Yeah.
continue with our careers and we can explore these options. So, sir, please
Right.
share some light on this.
Yeah. So that's a very legitimate observation. Now, India is at the forefront of the education sector. Just take this example of Byju's app. The person was an engineer and he made use of his engineering skills to develop an app. And now the app they are hiring really the top actors from Bollywood and to promote their stuff. And Byju's app is doing really well. That's just one example, and there are other examples as well. And just like you rightly said, there are opportunities on Udemy, Coursera, and also YouTube. And because we are at the forefront of this sector, and because we are right in the middle of a pandemic, or probably at the end of a pandemic, but nevertheless, online teaching and learning is going to be there for a long time going forward. Regardless of when the pandemic ends, online teaching and learning is going to be here really for a long time. And just like the CEO of YouTube said, that they are going to focus more and more on educational content. So here's what I have as a suggestion for all the students. They can try to come up with innovative ideas. If they want to develop a new app based on their technical expertise, they can go for it. If they want to launch a YouTube channel where they show people they try to educate people about some basic laws or principles or concepts, and they try to make use of animation, they probably and they try to make it more interesting, then people will see their videos more and more. So let's say you are an engineering student and you also know how to do animation. So you can make use of that skill, for example, to make highly engaging videos that nobody else will make. That's like a blue ocean strategy. You do something that nobody else does, people will come and they'll subscribe to your channel. So make use so the take home message is very simple. Make use of your skills, whatever your skills are. You could be good in engineering, you could be good in science, you could be good in scientific editing. Make use of that skill and see what you can showcase on YouTube or other platforms. See whether you can develop an app, see whether you can contribute to Udemy in some way, and then do that. And side by side, of course, you can keep doing your job. I think it will be a very rewarding in the long run. So you have to always, everybody needs to keep their eyes and ears open for opportunities. These are not the only opportunities. There will be more platforms in the future. So as long as we use our expertise and we make good use of the expertise and also our hobbies and other passions, and they all blend together to give a nice end result, sky is the limit. Literally, we can do a lot of contribution in this area, the area of education, spreading online education.
Okay, thank you so much for your answer, sir.
All right, welcome.
Any other questions, sir? I think there's no more questions. Then we will end this session. Nikhil sir, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Nikhil madam, for the invite, and I also thank BS